Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for staying for this panel, which I think is going to be the most interesting, not just because I'm chairing it, but these are business leaders, really extraordinary minds with a global perspective who have expertise in the capital markets, who can give some perspective and insight into the capital that will finance so much of what we've heard about over the last day and a half. It's been an unbelievably substantive, full program. And so I applaud all of your stamina for making it to this point in the afternoon. But you're in for a real treat now for this next panel. The way we're going to organize this panel is a little different than some of the other ones. We're going to have three remarks, relatively brief presentations. And then my job is to be Charlie Rose, if you're familiar with that program, and lead a informal sort of fireside chat conversation about how private capital, public money, et cetera, might finance some of the projects and the needs in the Arctic that we've heard so much about. Xie. So before opening up the panel to conversation, we thought we'd let each of the other panelists not make speeches from the podium, but perhaps a brief opening comment, sort of frame their perspective on this issue. And first, let's start with you, Mead, the Lieutenant Governor of Alaska.
Thank you, Scott. And Mr. President, thank you for having us here. I just want to say that it was a year ago on this stage that I was with the former mayor of the North Slope Borough, Edward Itta, who's here, and Reggie Jewell of the Northwest Arctic Borough. And I said that on the issue of Arctic shipping, I didn't want either of those gentlemen to have to be woken up at 2 in the morning by a ship that had passed by where there had not been consultation ahead of time if the ship was in trouble. And I just want to say that in the last year, there's been a lot of good news in terms of building up safety in the Arctic region. In the United States, the alternative compliance planning process for the Coast Guard has gotten in, and that's helped begin the creation of oil spill response organizations in our part of the world. The International Maritime Organization has made some improvements to the Polar Code, and there's more coming forward. The search and rescue agreements and the oil spill response agreements, you know, it's been said that one motto in the Alaskan Arctic was drill, baby, drill. We actually now are seeing drills conducted under those agreements to try to make sure our safety environment is better. And as someone who was in kind of the venture development business before I was lieutenant governor, I can tell you that with any venture, what I'm trying to get for people like Scott is what I call an investable vessel. It's an idea into which you can pour money to which the investor can expect a return. And for us, having basic safety on Arctic shipping is very important. And where we are today is we have people here in the audience, Scott, who would like to see joint investment or development in the port of Adak. We have people here in the audience who are interested in seeing the port of Port Clarence move forward. We have people here who are interested in joint investment and creating the investable vessel for icebreakers in the area, and I've seen from recent discussions with the Coast Guard a new interest in having public-private partnerships and that kind of infrastructure. And I could also tell, you know, stories of how we have helped create investable vessels in pipelines, in airports, in fact, everything on Scott's list. But the point here is this, is that I believe that through Arctic cooperation, we've gotten to some of the basic safety considerations to be able to look now at investable vessels to realize the long-term opportunity that Costco just explained to us.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about ships on shipping routes, on the shipping potential and opportunities there. Mr. Kwan comes from one of the largest shipbuilders in the world. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the ships that you're building or intend to build and what your perspective is from the shipbuilding industry.
First of all, I'm very sorry because I have a big catch a cold. And only changing is my voice, how to catch up original one. But for the shipping and shipbuilding, now we are trying to go to year-round in Arctic. Even the ice thickness is more than 2 meters, then you can break without icebreaker assistance. Even also in the Northern Sea route, in some season, then you can sail. But in that case, the vessel should have some ice crust strengthening. So in any case, you can build any place, but not for multi-year ice. But we think the single-year ice we can do. Not only the LNG carrier, but also any oil or some iron ore, nickel, any minerals or anything, we can go there. So I show you my video, my presentation to how to go in practical solution to reach that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about the shipping opportunities. There's also mining opportunities there. And I next would like to look to Tony Hodge, who represents the mining industry, and tell us maybe what's already happening there, what might happen there. Give us a sense of sort of the mining activities and potential, if you could, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, President Grimson, thank you again for inviting me this year. Short comment on the Arctic Assembly. It is a spectacular success, not only for Iceland, but I think it's standing as an example of the kind of collaboration, cooperation, and reaching for the higher road that the world desperately needs right now. So President Grimson and your colleagues, thank you very, very much for this invitation again. I want to make just a few small points to spark the conversation. We had an organizational discussion last week amongst the panelists, and I find myself wanting to say a number of things that seem to not contradict, but coming from a very different angle, because in the mining industry, we've had our knuckles rapped. Mining industry across the world is not the most popular industry, and we've had to learn some very hard lessons. And why I'm saying that is my plea here is that the North and the Arctic take advantage of those lessons in moving forward, because it's possible. There are leading companies that are making a big difference. And incidentally, one of those leading companies, Teck, is going to be speaking at a panel on mining and Arctic development in a few hours in session 1F. So I urge you to come and join us for that, because there will be some very interesting things said. However, a couple of quick comments. I noticed in the Chinese presentations in the previous session that there was an emphasis and a championing of the idea of consensus and mutual trust. And we've talked a great deal about the need to think about people and the environment of the North. But what we've discovered in the mining industry is that collaborative approach is not only essential, but the lesson is that although we need the rule of law, we need the framework that you talked about, it's not enough. It's not what's going to prevent the ship from going on the rocks. What's needed is a change in the behavior of people. So from their hearts and the depth of their activities, they respect the northern environment. They respect the northern people. The investment that you talked about is impatient. That's a tough issue. It's impatient. They want the return tomorrow, maybe next week or next quarter or next year, but mainly tomorrow or even yesterday. The Northerners, and I must tell you, I speak from a slight point of experience. 26 years ago, just about now, my wife and I on our honeymoon paddled in a small canoe across the Arctic Circle in the northern Yukon, and we felt the spirit of the North, the same spirit that you see here when you look to the mountains in Reykjavik. I must say that allowing the time for Northerners to understand is critical in this, and the impatience of investment is a dilemma which we haven't cracked yet. The need to move to behaviors in the business world, which the mining industry is finding absolutely essential in their projects in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, where communities are deeply involved at the beginning, not the end, is essential. My final point is that I've heard very, very little discussion about something that is very real and lies behind what I say. And that is, the world's communication system has changed dramatically. The Twitters that are going on from this room are floating around the world. The people, the Gwich'in people of Alaska, are in contact with the Sami, are in contact with the Kalahari Bushmen. What happens here will be known instantly across the world. And gone are the days when government and companies can go to a remote area and say, we're going to build a mine there, this is how it's going to be, or we're going to put a port there, this is how it's going to be, or we're going to build a railway, and this is how it's going to be. And you know, we need the infrastructure. We desperately need the infrastructure. But gone are the days when governments and large companies working in tandem can just pronounce. The communities will resist, and they are resisting across the world. That's the lesson that I bring from the mining industry. We're having to learn to deal with that reality. It's a different boundary condition, and it's entirely possible. And when it happens, and when you work with communities, that's when the idea of sustainability becomes possible, because you will be, in fact, aligned.
Thanks, Tony. And my appreciation of the panelists, we have now set a record for speed through our opening comments, and we'll move to a conversation. We'll attempt to leave some time for Q&A from the floor for the last maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so. We have a giant clock in front of us with a green number that says 40 in front of it, so we'll do our best to stick to that. And Tony, that might be one of the most interesting honeymoons I think I've ever heard of before. So I'd like to begin with really the topic of public-private partnerships. So this isn't going to be purely private capital, I don't think, because the projects are big and expensive and take a long time, as we've heard. On the other hand, the public sector maybe isn't prepared to sponsor these things alone. So maybe, Scott, I'd invite you to begin, and then other panelists. Could you maybe speak to what does that model look like, and what might that model look like in the Arctic?
Sure. I found Tony's comments very interesting. And with some of the discussions that I've had an opportunity with some people here, one of the things that I've begun to realize is that the Arctic needs a master plan. We talk about one-off developments and so on and so forth, but there needs to be an overarching vision for what infrastructure looks like in the Arctic. And that, let me just say, that's a very broad topic, whether it's ports or a ground transportation or search and rescue equipment or communications, whatever falls into that bucket. And Tony, I agree with you wholeheartedly that this is a dialogue which must start soon, and it must involve all parties, both from the public side and from the private side. You're right, Tony, in that investment capital is an impatient group. They like to see returns quickly. And I think what we need to do, in addition to developing this overarching master plan for the Arctic, and I'm not talking about a group of 9 men getting in a room and strategizing. I'm talking about developing a format or a forum to open up a dialogue, so that we can get a sense of what all of the needs of the Arctic are, and we can start to sketch out what this looks like and what it's going to cost. But additionally, I think we need to start developing the institutions and a framework to bring capital to play. For instance, we have had some preliminary discussions about an idea of a development bank. Development banks like the European Investment Bank or the EBRD are institutions which are not so concerned about instant return, but are there to help stimulate private investment by reducing risk and taking some of that variability and longer risk out of the equation, which private sector money does not want. So I think that working in the coming years on a sort of a master plan or a roadmap for the Arctic by the Arctic peoples, in addition to working to develop the institutions which will be necessary to finance this, both public and private or together, is probably the leading challenge that people like me have today.
Yeah, thanks. Mead, if I could turn to you next. does Alaska have a master plan, and what does the state do to help attract private capital to deal with some of these risk issues?
I'm not sure I would say we have a master plan, but I will say that we've got lots of experience with public-private partnerships within our state. We have a natural gas pipeline venture moving forward now, which is a public-private partnership, and the state owns 1/8 of the gas, so that's merged in. So the state will be a partner in the development of that gas. We've been very active in the development of the oil, using our royalty share to develop refineries and so forth. Where I would suggest, in terms of Scott's master plan idea, is that there's, we certainly have investable vessels that will be public-private vessels in terms of ports, in terms of icebreakers. We are doing it now in terms of telecommunications. And we have close to $100 billion or more worth of projects that are looking for capital that will have the public-private model with it. But I think for us in the Arctic, in terms of the master plan, there's at least 2 industries, maybe 3 if you include some mining ideas, where more than one nation will be needed to come to the table to make the infrastructure work. And let me just say on shipping, for example, there are several different scenarios for shipping that have been running around this room in the conversations. There's the Russian Northern Sea Route model, where the Russians have icebreaker escorts. You show up, you tell them what time you're coming, you pay your bill, and they take you across the top of the continent. There may be the unescorted vessel model, which the shipbuilders believe we can get to now, where it's just like any other ocean. Or it may be something where we and Iceland look at a hub model, where it's a shuttle across with heavy machinery and then connect in with regular container shipping other places. It's hard to say exactly what scenario is going to work, but I do think we need to look at what is the common investment going to be there. Likewise, we heard from space promoters yesterday, and there's a number of things in the satellite telecommunications business where, frankly, I think Arctic cooperation has failed in getting us the best deal for telecommunications, and we could get it. And when it comes to mining, there's certainly an advantage in looking at common smelters and how to combine mining with the least expensive energy.
Yeah.
So at least in those 3 areas, I would say a master plan would work, because it would force capital and finance ministers and governors and presidents to get together to make the basic projects in the Arctic happen.
Is that the World Bank or the Arctic Council, or who helps that?
Well, I look at the 8 nations of the Arctic, and Norway, Alaska have large sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah.
Iceland has certainly demonstrated lots of versatility and capability in the finance sector.
Yeah.
I believe that a new institution may bring together several of the local institutions around the North for cooperation. One project will probably help define it.
Yeah. Bjarni, I want to come to you in a second to talk about Iceland's view of attracting foreign capital. But first, Mead said something very interesting about differing shipping models. And from the Daewoo perspective, do you have a preferred model for shipping in the Arctic? What do you think is going to be the winner?
So in my material, I got from many solutions, because Anthony and Mead mentioned about cost matter and how to go to in tomorrow, not today.
Yeah.
But still we are building ARC-7 LNG carrier. Maybe it will deliver 16 March in the Arctic. It means any type of ship we can go without any icebreaker resistance. The new Panama Canal, its beam is 49 meters, and the biggest icebreaker is 34 meters. But our LNG carrier, 50 meters, without icebreaker resistance. In terms of the going northern sea route in winter season, we need 2 icebreaker for bigger ship.
Okay.
But either Suezmax, Aframax, or new Panamax container ship, we can go.
So it's a combination of models depending on the ship, the cargo, and the route.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
So still we are building design for the tanker, or carrier, LNG carrier, any type of ship you can go by tomorrow.
Tony, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, the idea of private-public partnerships is a terrific idea. I want to bring in another dimension, though. And again, what we've seen in the mining industry across the world is that The strongest initiatives of this sort, in fact, bring together government and business and civil society. And civil society gets forgotten. And I think of the northern shipping issues again, and I think simultaneously of the environmental organizations in the world that are focused on marine environment. The conversation between those groups and the business groups and the governments involved in Arctic shipping should start yesterday. And they're not the enemy. It's a big lesson in the mining industry that civil societies, people are a key part of the conversation. So there's a different aspect of partnership here that has to include civil society. I really believe that.
Yeah. So Bjarne, Iceland is in a really exciting strategic spot, as you mentioned, for attracting investment in new businesses, and yet is also in a very interesting moment in its history after the financial crisis and issues with the currency, et cetera. How does Iceland think about attracting private capital, where it is in its moment, both, I guess, in the near to medium term, but also the long term?
Well, as you mentioned, I believe we are strategically extremely well placed in the North Atlantic. We have open harbors year-round, and there can be no doubt when you look at the shipping routes that we are in the midst of the area which is of importance. But as you can also hear from the panel here, we are, I feel, at the beginning of a very important discussion. There is talk of new institutions to come to the next step. There is talk of even the need for development bank, as I heard mentioned, and which is an idea which I believe makes a lot of sense. And the points that have been made on the dialogue with civil society, I think, are also of very much importance. And those things are all happening already. For example, in Iceland, we have seen interests from abroad on, for example, building harbors in Iceland, in rural areas where the people will experience tremendous change. And if the idea is unsuccessful, it's going to be a disaster. And at this point in time, you feel like, well, I mentioned the race earlier in my talk. Sometimes I feel like underneath the water there is a quiet race happening already. People are trying to find out, okay, will the port be in the east of Iceland, north of Norway, or possibly in Canada? And who's going to take the first step? And how are we going to include, let's say, civil society, or even create a public-private partnership when we really don't feel from the gut that we have the answer? Are we going to risk taxpayers' money on it?
Right.
Are we going to risk environmental factors? Are we going to risk social issues, such as the ones that have been mentioned? I think those are all tremendously important questions. At the time, to maybe more directly answer your question, at the time we see we are strategically very well located. We certainly have the interest to make the best of the opportunities at hand. We want to see a structured plan being made, and we like to work within the frameworks of the Arctic Council. Like I said, I believe we must move forward based on a solid structure of law and respect for the rule of law. But we are starting to tread waters where we will not have all the answers.
So a lot of your comments have to do with timing. And I know, for example, we talk here about climate change and coming business. There's already a lot of business. The largest zinc and nickel mines are in the Arctic. Huge productive fisheries are in the Arctic. There's extraordinary oil and gas production already there. Yet a lot of these comments are about, I think, anticipated business with climate change that's coming. So I'd love to hear the panelists' sort of view on the timing of these opportunities. Is this something that's ripening, that's ripe? Will it be next year at the Arctic Circle that we talk about sort of the investment bank has been formed and sort of there's billions of dollars being pushed out the door to finance some sort of major hub and spoke shipping system? Anybody have a view on the timing of when the Arctic opportunity ripens, or is it now? Mead?
Well, You just heard Costco talk about bringing a cargo ship across the Arctic Ocean, unescorted, carrying containers going from China to Iceland.
Yeah.
And let's just take that scenario. Asian goods going to Europe come to a hub here where they go to different points in Europe. Okay, that would mean building a larger port here or a container port here. For our end of the world, you might not need to stop in Alaska on your way, but on the other hand, filling up that ship on the way back, stop in Alaska at a place like Adak on Alaska, and ship. Some containers may go on to Asia. Some containers may go on to different points in Asia with different ships going by in the North Pacific route, and some may go to North America. So, you know, in that case, you would need twin ports. You would need development in this part of the world, on this side of the Arctic, as well as on our side of the Arctic. So whether we do it as a development bank or perhaps something like an Arctic Sea Route Authority, as they do in the St. Lawrence with the St. Lawrence Sea Route agreements, or something when you talk about port authorities, you can look at several major metropolitan areas around the world that where the port authorities have become major financing vehicles. And so if we had one group that was looking at shipping and affiliated infrastructure where our nation said we're going to go to the world together, promote safe shipping in the world together, and offer reliability, which is what the shipping interests tell us is most important. They want to tell the people whose goods they're carrying that they're going to get there on time. And so it's going to take infrastructure on our part on both sides of the Arctic in order to make it work. So whether it's a development bank, Scott, or the idea of a shipping authority, I think it is ripe to begin having those kind of feasibility discussions.
Yeah. So the timing for those institutions are today to build the infrastructure for the Arctic of tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing I would say to Governor Treadwell is I don't think a development bank or a shipping authority or a maritime authority, any of these ideas are mutually exclusive. The amount of capital that's going to have to go into the Arctic is humongous.
Yeah.
And to my chart that I spoke to about the melting sea ice, the reality is if we decided we were going to just today, while we're here today, we're going to have the complete master plan for the Arctic, and we're going to begin now. The reality is those deliverables are going to start showing up a decade or two from now. So if we really, we hear Costco shipping through the Arctic, we hear all these needs that are out there that are coming. To quote Eleanor Roosevelt, tomorrow is now.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do this, we are going to have to begin now to get these institutions in place to make it happen.
Okay. Great. I'd like to maybe pivot just a bit and, of course, tackle the elephant in the room in a sense, which is the business opportunities exist in the Arctic because of climate change, right? And many of the members of the audience represent environmental groups, NGOs, all of us actually, of course, love the environment, and it's dear to our hearts. And there's now opening access to regions that used to be sort of frozen or less accessible. The Arctic wasn't always thought of as a emerging economy or frontier market. How should private capital or businessmen or investors or us in the room think about that paradox? What is and I guess prefacing this last bit of the question, it's also an extraordinary opportunity because now we have a chance to get it right, to have truly sustainable development, a new model of investing that we're talking about here. What are the views of the panelists about sort of that paradox about climate change allowing more access and the investment that comes with it? Did you want to, you have the microphone, Mr. Kwan.
I want to show my presentation material, then easily understand how to go easily access.
He's got a short video.
Oh, you have a short video? Okay.
Not short, but
Can we see it?
please ask them.
I don't control the video, no.
Not video, but
If anyone's listening in the control room in the back,
some slide. Yeah,
yeah.
I already gave my PowerPoint.
Looks like there's a mouse moving. Yeah, that's progress. Yeah, while they're pulling that up, Tony, could you maybe speak to that?
And I'll leap and if they get going on this. Listen, change has happened for a long, long time. I don't think it's useful, personally, I don't, this so-called paradox that's arisen in this meeting, that wasn't part of the jargon last year. What are we really saying? Do we want to encourage climate change in order to encourage business? Is that the real underlying message? I mean, it's not, of course. And so what we have to do, I think for those who wish to argue about whether or not there's a paradox, we should set up a room next year and put them all in that room and they can argue about that. Because what I'm really interested in doing, and quite frankly, I think people in the mining industry are interested in doing, is responding to the change that we see in a way that cares for the people in the north and cares for the environment in the north. And we need to get on with that in a practical way.
Yeah.
That's my sense about it.
That would be an exciting room next year to have.
Maybe there'll be a lot of people in it too. I don't know, but I won't be there.
So I think we want to open this up for conversation, not leave it for the sort of last two questions, and then we're out of time. We've got about 12 minutes, so I'm going to skip you actually on the way through because I think you just made your pitch. But the question is in Cramer Mad Money style: bear or bull on the Arctic, and why? But that comes with the caveat, of course, of this longer-term issues we described and the need to have a master plan, the rest of it. And if you could maybe just clearly Daewoo is a bull on this issue. I think we could agree. Bear or bull, and maybe why briefly, and then if you want to queue up at the microphones, we'll take your questions. And questions, please, as you frame it, as you think, they need to be not speeches, but succinct, short questions that we can succinctly, shortly answer to get through as many as possible. So, Mead, bear or bull?
I'm bull, but it's join hands to jump in the pool. So
That rhymed, Mead.
No, very seriously, we need to work with several nations at once, and it can be all the rest of us without Russia, or there's things we could do with Russia at the table, and that's a very difficult geopolitical question right now. But the fact is that we're going to offer reliability in Arctic shipping, and that's there are people who are captive to Arctic shipping who need to bring LNG out to world markets.
Yeah.
So you're going to serve that market regardless, okay? But if we're going to offer the world a seaway, we really do have to get several nations together.
Okay, Scott?
Bull. And to quote George Shultz, former Secretary of the United Secretary of the, what is he? Secretary of State to the United States is, this is the greatest opportunity since the end of the Ice Age. Wow. And mankind has a humongous challenge, opportunity, and responsibility in front of itself. And it's time for us to be responsible and take the lead before someone moves in and does something irresponsible with it.
Bjarni, bear or bull?
I'm very bull on the opportunities. I don't want to merely talk about this from a capitalist or a business point of view, but also from the opportunities that lie in other areas as well. I think for the Icelandic society, if we would, expand the dialogue and talk also about, what we have to offer, not only in terms of investment opportunities, experience we do have in terms of search and rescue, maritime safety, environmental ruling, all of those areas. I think we do have a lot of offer, and I am certain, and we just see it from the attendance here this time around, and I think there will be more people coming next year and the year after, that we are talking about something that is bull.
Yeah.
Else, the room would be empty, I believe.
All right. Tony?
So, listen, picking up from Governor Treadwell, we have to do it together, all of the countries. But we have to bring the women into the equation and look at the gendered problem in this room right now, and it's not an issue we've talked about very much. And we have to do it with the people from the communities at the periphery and the people in the center as well, within the countries, right across the board in the Arctic.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, you are the most thoughtful bulls I've ever met. Why don't we start with this microphone and just run through the queue? So please, succinct question. We'll take all three of you at once. So just please, succinct question for the panel, and then we'll move to our side of the room. Please.
Thank you. Maria Mock from Iceland. I would like to ask you about a humongous opportunity and asking where is hydrogen technology and icebreakers? What do you say about bringing forth the hydrogen electric technology and use it in the Arctic as much as possible?
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Could
you.
we get the second question?
Yes, my name is Rasmus Bertelsen from University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. Western Russian energy collaboration in Russia's high north has been, shall we say, challenged recently. How do you see geopolitical risk for what you're talking about? And how do you think such geopolitical risk shall be managed? Thank you.
Thank you. And the third question?
Hello, Miko Merit from the Polaris Group. I have just one question, quick. So if we were to create a multilateral development bank for the Arctic, what kind of governance could ensure a somewhat balance of power between states, companies, and indigenous peoples? And second question, linked, do you think that the Arctic Council, the Arctic Economic Council, could be a base for that?
Okay, so if we do a minute per answer, we can get to the other side of the room afterwards. Why don't we look to Daewoo is there are plans on the board for hydrogen power and icebreakers, or what's your view on hydrogen and icebreakers?
As a practical solution, the market is not ready for hydrogen propulsion system because in order to make the hydrogen, then it requires huge amount of the electricity. So still it's feasible because when you use hydrogen, emission zero, like a nuclear power, but it requires huge size of electric.
Mead, can I look to you to speak to the geopolitical risk question?
I'll try, but I'll also just say that natural gas may be a bridge fuel to hydrogen. And you're going to see most of the major ports in the world with some sort of LNG refueling capability within a decade.
Yeah.
We're seeing it happen on the West Coast now. As far as the geopolitical issues, I don't know how to deal with Russia and Ukraine, except to say that I think we have very solid reasons to work together in the Arctic. Mm-hmm. And I've been criticized for saying so. And I think one path for Russia to gain back the good stead of the rest of the world is to talk about cooperation in the Arctic.
Yeah. Scott, can you maybe give us a little more color about what the bank might look like and how it might work?
Well, I think this is something that's on a whiteboard at this point, meaning everything is subject to change and we don't have all the pieces. I believe that all of the constituents that were mentioned need to be included as part of the process. And in terms of the Arctic Council's involvement, I would put the Arctic Council on a long list of all the people that would be invited. Mm-hmm. I do agree and feel very strongly that if this institution were ever to be formed, that the Arctic or the indigenous peoples need to be represented. And not only do they need to be represented, but they must have a very strong say in what's going on.
Great, thank you. Wow, the queue has grown. Okay, so we've got 5.5 minutes and 4 questions with panelists. So please, name, rank, and serial number.
Lara Satrakian from Arctic Deeply. My question's for Mr. Dodge. As someone who has steered the mining industry toward better behavior and greater sustainability, I'm one of those people on Twitter, and I'm hearing how this conversation in this room sounds to people outside of this room. You know, there is a massive deficit of global public trust in certain industries, mining and extractives, in certain countries. I'll leave it at that. How do you draw the lines? How do you convince the public that certain things are sacred and will remain sacred? How do you keep business accountable to the science of environmental necessity?
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Edvard Glucksman, University of Exeter. As a scientist, I'm worried that simple researchers are being left behind. How can the business community work together with scientists, with the research community, in order to move forward with their own business?
Okay, great. Next.
Gillian Maxwell, the Terramar Project. Conservation always seems to be the orphan of business. How can you make conservation pay?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Andrew Woodcock, Minas, Political Risk Consultants, London. Great presentation on Northern Sea Route. What a game changer in the good years. Could the panel comment on the uncertainty factor, particularly with the elements and the weather? Is it really going to be a game changer given how bad it can be in the bad years?
Okay, thank you.
Danielle Trudeau. My background is disaster management. We talk a lot about search and rescue, but I'm wondering if you can talk about how you see public and private partnerships supporting in longer-term disaster mitigation and how we start those conversations.
All right, so 3 minutes, 40 seconds to cover all those questions. I know you guys can do it. So maybe we'll start with you, Tony, and I'll give each panelist an opportunity to maybe pick which of those you'd like, and some very brief sort of summary remarks to conclude, if you would.
Yeah, thanks. Very quickly. Conservation pay. Session 1F this afternoon, the Executive Director of Conservation for WWF International and the Managing Director of the Red Dog Mine in Alaska are going to participate in our panel. Come to that and we'll talk more about it at that point, I would suggest.
Right. Yep.
Trust deficit, bringing change. You cannot force people into good behavior. That's a big lesson that we've come up with. There is a trust deficit. You cannot just tell people what you are doing. It matters what you do. It's the actions you take that then can allow people to judge for themselves that it's consistent with their values. Deep lesson that we've learned. That's the basis in which we operate.
Thank you. Bjarni, any concluding thoughts or answers to those questions?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of the questions that have been brought up, I think, and even the geopolitical risk issue, I think tighter cooperation is the answer. And it's a matter that has been brought up time and again. We already have formed the Arctic Council, but evidently we will need to go deeper and start cooperating in wider circles, not least with businesses that are showing interest. And what is interesting at the moment is that it's not only regional interest, it's global interest that is being brought to the area. Now, on disaster management, I think, again, this is the answer. So let me just conclude by saying how much I appreciate taking part here today and look forward to seeing you all next year.
Well, I'll just take on search and rescue. I think search and rescue is of critical importance in the Arctic. I think it is something that we are way behind the curve on. And I think one of the greatest stimulants to financing search and rescue, as well as trying to get responsible behavior, is through an insurance mechanism where you can put in place private sector incentives to put in place the things necessary to protect the Arctic. For those who aren't familiar with it, Benjamin Franklin founded the first fire insurance company, and the reason how it worked was when you paid your premium, you got access to the fire trucks to come to your house. So, private sector has dealt with these kinds of issues before, and I think they can come in again.
Conservation and science. On conservation, I can just tell you that the business opportunities in renewable energy in the north are tremendous. Frankly, I'd love to see the DC cable project from Iceland move forward because it'll help be the pathway for some of the stranded renewables and stranded gas projects that we've got as well. And a northern trade and power is actually a very interesting concept. And we're one of the best proving grounds in the world for that. As far as science is concerned, Mike McCrander was on this podium yesterday. Shell has put hundreds of millions of dollars into science, putting researchers to work. And when I was chair of the Arctic Research Commission, we encouraged lots of partnerships. We have many university people here, and the International Arctic Science Committee is very interested in working with scientists.
All right, Oleg, flashing red numbers, but you get to bring us home.
Only 5 seconds.
All right.
As a shipbuilder, first question for the mining industry, it's a good sign because the iron ore carrier mining is easier than LNG carrier. So still you open one way. The second thing is the weather condition in Arctic. But still, in case of weather or some wave or something, the North Sea or North Atlantic is much higher, severe than the Arctic. Only the thing is far remote. So in winter season, 24 hours dark and something we have to provide a very good winterization and good radar system and communication system, how to easily rescue or something. We are focused on that. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank the audience for your time and attention, and please join me in thanking our panelists for this presentation.